All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. And if I have to, Adele, I will drive this coffee mug to you. It got returned to me. I am going to send it to the address that I have in the email here for you again, and we'll see if it gets there again. If it does not, I will email you and bug you for your address one more time. Anyways, thank you for your patience, though. Just want to say nothing too new in the old PacWest Bigfoot, except for on the Facebook page. Yesterday, I had posted up a new picture that hasn't actually been out in the public yet, and just wanted to get your guys' thoughts about it and see what you thought about it. So there you go. Other than that, no real news. So with that, I'm going to cough. I am going to take a little swig of this old coffee, Sasquatch coffee, that is. Clear my throat for all you fans out there. And we're going to get to this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. All right, Frenchtown, Idaho, Bigfoot crossing. Woman watches Bigfoot cross the road and then, I watched this thing cross the road, stop, stare at me, and then head off in a direction I hoped it would not. Hi, Dave. My name is Miriam, and I had not only seen a Bigfoot cross the road near my husband and mine's home outside of Frenchtown, Idaho, we also observed this thing together just a few hours later. Here's what we saw, and what happened on our property back around 2011. The Frenchtown, Idaho Bigfoot crossing. Right about 2003 or 4, I believe it was 4, my husband and I bought a home and moved to Idaho. We were used to country living, so being in such a small town and living on the edge or near near the edge of town, was nothing new for us. What was new was the thought that some scary or proverbial mythical monster of the woods like Bigfoot really does and did exist. Never, not for a moment, did I believe they existed. Neither did my husband, well, who is still a pretty matter-of-fact person who likes to get to the point with things, so I thought. At least about this subject, I thought. But we did see one, and saw it twice, actually. I saw it twice. This all took place on and near our property, and all in one evening. We still live here, though, and ever since we have had no trouble or have seen or heard anything like we experienced that night since. It was, about 7 years after moving here that we had our encounter. It was scary, and I know I've said that already, but I mean, this thing was really scary looking and seemed rather menacing to us. Here's what happened. The green, green grass of home. Most of Idaho is open range down towards the south here. Most. But where we live, between Frenchtown and it is rather thick with Pacific Northwest forests along the mountain ridges. There really is a big difference between southern Idaho, central, and the northern part of the state. The further you go, the thicker the forests, I suppose, and more of them. And I think the more different types of animals that roam them. We live on an old country road, one that has no name and is considered a large driveway, in fact. We have neighbors, but both are north and south of us, about 300 to 400 yards apart. Like I said, it's an old country road, more like a driveway it feels, and we live in the country anyways. Nothing has changed my mind about living here, and although I was pretty frightened that night, I don't think this thing lived in the area and was only passing through, so no reason to move out of fear. Besides, I know how to use a gun today, and my husband is an avid hunter. Here's what happened first and what followed that crazy and scary night. The road crossing. I worked a swing shift slot of about 4 to 9 p.m. at a hospital just north of Missoula near Westview Park. So driving would take time back and forth during that period of time in my life. I am a nurse. Even now, I work at a local doctor's office closer to Frenchtown. But I'll keep which one to myself. But I had worked that night and got off a little earlier as my friend owed me an hour for covering for him a few weeks before, and he was paying me back. So I had left around 8 p.m. It was about 25-30 minutes ride home, and that is without any traffic, as there usually is no real traffic issues out here. Well, once I got caught behind a tractor, but that was only annoying at best. But what I would see that evening was plain old scary. As I said, I was heading home. It was dark, but it was clear and still very warm that late summer night. I was thinking about what was waiting for me at home. My husband said he had made a late dinner and wanted to eat out on the deck as much as possible until the weather did change. It gets pretty cold in this part of the Pacific Northwest, and that would be starting soon enough after this experience. I had made it to my turnoff that would take me to the driveway. It was maybe 300-400 yards away from my personal driveway when I saw it plain as day. A Bigfoot. And that was all that ran through my mind. I'm staring at a Bigfoot. It was dark, like I said, but it was clear out and practically a full moon, so it was bright outside and I could see very, very well. I came up to a bend in the road, well, almost to one, of only two bends before I was in my actual driveway when I spotted, well, a creature in the road. This would be about 100 or so yards from our house itself. It was as if it was just standing there waiting for me, weird as that may sound. But it was not until I was about 30 yards or so from the bend that this massive dark figure came walking out from the left to the right, basically from below our house and into the direction of it right up the hillside. But before it walked up that hill, it stopped for the briefest of moments and looked right at me. I could see that this was not a person. It was on two legs, and it had arms and shoulders that were just massive and seemed very muscular. It was covered in hair, I believe, not clothing, that is for sure, and that was the first giveaway in my mind that this was not a person, but it was something I'd never seen before. The word Bigfoot or Sasquatch did not immediately enter my mind at first, but whatever it was not a person, that was for sure. It was a really scary and crazy moment as I came to a complete stop and just stared at this creature. But the moment would last seconds as it sped off in what seemed to be 2 steps and a leap up and into the woods. I practically peeled out and drove off as fast and as safe as I could home. The monster. I can't tell you how fast I ran from the car to the front door. Unfortunately, at the time, we had not yet installed the automatic garage door, which was put in no later than 2 weeks. But I was so frantic coming through the door, my husband looked at me and came running from across the living room asking me if I was all right. Of course, I was not. I was extremely upset with what I'd just observed. And I went on a rant about it and what I thought it was. My husband, bless his soul, was sitting there listening to me with eyes as wide as I'd ever seen them before. At first I thought he might be on the fence with what I was telling him, but I was wrong. He was actually, and to my surprise, eating up every word. It was funny, but I'd learned something new about my husband that night and going forward. He knew of Bigfoot and was a believer. How I did not know this before is still a mystery to me, but, well, the existence of this thing is no longer one of those mysteries in life for either of us now. I finally started to calm down and ate with my husband outside on the deck that late evening. I felt pretty uncomfortable as the deck was on the second level of our beautiful home at the time. It was a contemporary style home in the country, but I still felt uncomfortable, even that high up. I still had eyes in the back of my head, and the ones in the front were darting around like a deer being hunted. I think my husband sensed this, and soon we were eating dessert inside and talking more about what I'd seen on the road. That night rolled on, and we were night owls for the most part. He worked at home, and I the swing shift, as I said, so sleeping in was fine, and not really considered sleeping in as much as it was part of our sleeping habits in general. Nowhere to go at 5 a.m. But eventually I was tired and still a bit emotional, so we headed up to bed. We figured on reaching out to someone in the Bigfoot community the next day, and boy would we, and for more reasons than a road sighting. The house in the woods. We were asleep, and I, being the heavy sleeper, was woken to the gentle pushing of my husband on my arm and telling me in a semi-soft but excited voice to wake up. I sat up, and he was telling me to listen as he walked over to the tall windows in the bedroom and looked out into the dark. It took a moment, but after a minute I heard it. It was like a bark or a whoop, sort of. I couldn't really tell at first. Well, it was more like a set of whoops, I guess, but they were not far off by any means. They seemed to be coming from right outside the window. My husband, however, said he could not see a thing out there, so whatever it was close, but most likely inside the trees surrounding the house. Our property sat along a hillside that was surrounded by trees and brush. Even though it was pretty bright out with practically a full moon, we saw nothing up to that point, but we kept hearing the whooping or barking like sound every minute or so. My husband was unsure of what it was, and so was I. But the event earlier down the road came flooding back, and I asked him if it was possible that it was that thing that crossed the road. I remember he looked at me with what seemed a look as if the light went off in his head, even some enjoyment almost. The sound kept coming, but seemed to be on the move toward the front of the house, or at least around the side of it. We too moved with the sound, looking out the window from room to room until we completed a circle through the rooms and ended up by the French doors that opened out onto the deck that stood about, like I said, 8 or so feet above the ground facing the backyard. My husband, and with reluctance of mine, of course, opened the doors and stepped outside. The whooping sound stopped, and so did all the common sounds we were used to at night around here. It was all getting real strange and real fast. We stood there for a good minute or so. It was chilly, but my heart was racing so fast that I was feeling warm even without a coat on. But like I said, we were standing there for a few when my husband lifted his arm and began pointing into the trees. I could not see it at first, but after a few seconds of my eyes adjusting to the dark, I saw it. It was swaying back and forth, a tall, human-like figure between a few trees. It seemed to be faced in our direction. I was not sure it could see us, as it was slightly angled towards the front yard, but I could see the figure from about its mid-thigh up. It was huge. Some reports I've read say this thing, on average, was about 7 to 8 feet tall. I have to say this thing was at least 9 to 10 feet tall, period. It would have been able to hop right up on our porch or balcony with little effort or just one big step. I was really frightened at that point. My husband, well, like any other man, he was almost smiling and in awe of what he was seeing. Like I said, he was a believer, and now he was seeing this thing in real life and in real time. It stood there, swaying back and forth for another minute at least. Then it whooped again, and this time we could see the shadow of its upper body shoot forward a bit as it did so. I can tell you that this thing, this Bigfoot, was the same one I had seen earlier. Get in the house now. I wanted to go inside. My husband said we could head inside slowly and that we could continue observing the thing from the window. I still stood there swaying, and now several minutes had gone by. It had still stood there swaying, and now several minutes had gone by. I can't be sure, but what I could see was in fact massive, wide in the shoulders, probably about as wide as I am tall. And I am not that tall, but I am 5 foot 4 inches. So that would be pretty wide for a barreled chest like that. The arms are said to be long, and what I noticed seemed to be as long as well. However, I could not be sure. It was dark, and this thing did not move from its position until a few moments later. By the time it did move, we were still inside looking out through the window, and this thing started making the odd whooping sounds again. Eventually, however, it did move, like I said, and like lightning it walked from the south to the north in a very fast manner. At that point we lost visual of the Bigfoot, but did not lose visual of us, that was for sure. The whoop turned into something else I can't really explain. I swear I heard this thing mumbling in a loud way. I was not sure it was trying to talk or whatever, but it was like a messed up mumbling speech-like sound. The next thing you know, there was a slap on the far side of the house. We have a decent-sized home, nearly 2,500 square feet. It came from across the house and was so loud I thought it might have damaged the outside wall, but it did not. And I've heard of these things damaging homes, and we were lucky. My husband and I made our way after that to the side of the house, and quickly. My husband was getting more and more excited as I was starting to pass out, actually. We stood on either side of the living room and dining room looking out the windows for any and all movement. My husband is the one who spotted it first yet again. I ran over to get a good look at this thing and scare myself even more, I suppose. But it was running by then and fast. It cleared our yard in literally just 10 to 12 steps, no kidding. This thing was fast, but this time we could make out more of it. It was running through the open area with the moon still shining pretty bright outside. It was all of the 9 to 10 feet tall I was talking about, and although it seemed slightly bent at the waist and knees for that matter, even as it ran in its very crazy-like manner, it was just odd. I almost thought this thing was going to tip over and fall over its own feet forward. But, surprisingly enough, this thing was fast and athletic almost. It was the same thing I'd seen earlier, only taller than I thought, covered in long, clumpy hair. We never saw the face completely, and I'm kind of glad about that, I suppose. But we saw a Bigfoot not 15 to 20 yards or so outside our window, on that road, and at home. I'm still standing. I am standing my ground, so no, I never gave in to the fear I felt for days after the sighting and experience. We still live in the same house today, as I said, and although that was a truly scary moment for me, I have simply grown a better respect for the countryside I live in, and what lives in it as well. We did contact some experts, but we did not follow up with them after their initial investigation. If interviewing us is considered an investigation, personally, I did not get along with them, so it ended after that first interview. And my husband, well, I think he is hoping to lure that thing back here and create a sanctuary for it. I laugh. But like I told him, keep the food in the house and leave it alone. We have not had any other contacts or visuals of that Bigfoot, not a single peep since. But I have grown eyes in the back of my head, Dave, when getting home after dark, that's for sure. But that is our story. Thanks, Miriam.